For this edition of Now Age Conversations, I'm speaking again with my friend Margaret Kimberley. Hey, Margaret.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Good, good.
So Margaret is the senior editor at Black Agenda Report. If you haven't been to that website, it's a place where you need to go if you're looking for really objective reporting on a whole host of issues. Coming from the left perspective, so you shouldn't be shocked by some of the content that you're reading because it's certainly stronger than what you're going to see in the mainstream press. And what your piece last week, Obama's last gasp imperialism. Certainly, you pull no punches there as usual, and talking about America's foreign policy. So I'm hoping we can kind of get into a little bit of that because it just seems like such an area where as we'll get into, we haven't been so misled in so long in this country.
Yes.
with what's happening. Yourself and Stephen Cohen, writing The Nation. People have been kind of pointing to what's going on in Russia, Ukraine, Putin, this whole narrative, but it's really gotten buried. So can you talk a little bit about maybe just like the history of after the Soviet Union fell, sort of what was the quid pro quo agreement with NATO and how that thing is now really eclipsed into what's happening today?
Sure. Well, when the Soviet Union collapsed, remember when the Berlin Wall fell in the early 90s, at that point there were still Soviet troops in Eastern Germany. There were 300,000, I believe. Excuse me. And the Soviets could have left them there, but they had an agreement with President Bush the elder. They thought they had an agreement. Of course, what did they say about a verbal agreement? It's I can't remember. But anyway, that they would pull their troops out, that NATO should not expand to Russia's borders, and they got what they thought was a promise that this would not happen. They would withdraw their troops away from the former Soviet bloc nations, and NATO would not expand. Well, 20 years later, NATO has expanded right up to Russia's borders. All of the former Soviet bloc states have joined NATO. Some of the former Soviet republics, the Baltic states, have joined NATO. And there are troops, American troops are currently doing exercises in Moldova, a tiny country between Romania and Ukraine. So there's all kinds of military activity right on the border of Russia. And the last time this happened was over 70 years ago when Germany invaded Russia. So it was, and Bush apparently told others that he was lying to Gorbachev when he made what Gorbachev thought was a promise, and he had no intention of ever living up to it. So we've had 20 years of continued encroachment on Russia, and this is the way I describe it to people. Suppose it were the other way around. Suppose Vladimir Putin had Russian troops in Mexico or Canada. How would that go over in the United States? So this is the background of where we are now. And this Western encroachment culminated in the coup in 2014 in Ukraine against the elected prime minister. For years, the United States had been giving money to NGOs, had been fomenting opposition to this pro-Russian government. But Ukraine needed help. Putin actually said everybody should help Ukraine, that Russia would aid Ukraine, that Western Europe should aid Ukraine. And the United States says, no, you got to pick. You got to choose one or the other. And he chose Russia. That was a pretext then for these groups who had been ginned up over these years to pull down this government. So there was a coup. It was instigated by the United States and NATO. And if anybody doubts it, Victoria Nuland, who's the Undersecretary of State for something or other, was heard on a not secure cell phone, obviously, blabbing at the time that Yatsenyuk was his name, is our guy. We want him to be the new prime minister of Ukraine. So, and she was giving out cookies in the Maidan protests. So we know that the United States was behind that. So not only have we had this continued encroachment of NATO and the actual overthrow of a government on Russia's border, the country through which all the invasions that in the past have taken place. So that's where we are now, and yet we are constantly told that Putin is the aggressor in the situation.
Yeah. Well, not only Putin is the aggressor, we're basically told that Putin's the devil. I mean, it's that absurd in the American press that they've created a boogeyman, a convenient boogeyman, and that now, I mean, it's the late night comedian's joke. It's everybody needs a sort of foil. It's Vladimir Putin. And let's remember, Putin said, "Don't overthrow Gaddafi." Putin said, "Don't overthrow Assad." Putin said, probably don't overthrow Saddam Hussein as well. And of course, you know, look, any rational person would say, why are we overthrowing people anyway? But I mean, that's a whole other question. But yeah, to make him out to be this villain is and with the you know, with the notion, how dare he not work for American interests? Look at him working for Russia's interests. I mean, it seems to be his job.
Yes, I would think. Americans always brag about doing what's in our best national interest, and certainly we should expect him to. But so the plot was to get to Ukraine. Russia is an oil and gas producing nation. The U.S.-Saudi scheme to lower oil prices and gasoline prices around the world has really hurt Russia's economy. There are sanctions against Russia, which came into being after the shoot down of the Dutch airliner over Ukraine. It is not clear who shot that plane down. I don't know if we have time to talk about that, but there's no proof that the pro-Russian fighters in Donetsk and Lugansk shot down that plane. So, but these sanctions are hurting Russia's economy. The fall in the price of energy is hurting Russia's economy. And the United States, it's very frightening to me, this propaganda against Putin, because it's a tried and true way of doing things. You demonize someone so badly that people turn against them or don't care about them. So we've been told that Putin is made fun of. I think it's the same picture of him riding shirtless on a horse, but it's reproduced thousands of times. We're told crazy rumors about his life. He had a mistress who had a baby. No, he's dating Rupert Murdoch's ex-wife. And then, of course, it's KGB. He was a KGB officer. But so what? George H.W. Bush ran the CIA, so it's not like we never had an intelligence person running our country. But it's used, the KGB is so scary and conjures up so many negative images. That's why they go on and on and on about it. Yeah. And now we've reached the point, it seems to me, where all this propaganda has a purpose. And the purpose is to do what? I'm not sure the United States wants a shooting war against Russia, but they could end up with one inadvertently. That is one of my fears. A little more than 100 years ago, World War I started. I don't think anybody thought they were starting this worldwide conflagration, that millions of people would die. But they did anyway, even though that was not necessarily their plan. So it is frightening to me, and it also shows the degree to which the corporate media is like this with the government. The New York Times, the Washington Post, they repeat word for word what the State Department says. And they'll just make up crazy stuff like Obama was in Alaska. And suddenly it was Russia has more icebreakers than anybody else in the world. Well, if you look at a map of the North Pole, Russia surrounds the North Pole more than any other country. Well, so what? So they'll just make up stuff. Is Russia cutting cables? Is the Russian Navy, the U.S. Navy is 4 times the size of Russia's Navy. We have the biggest military in the world. Russia has troops outside of Russia in only one place, Syria. The United States has troops in 100 different countries around the world. So there's no comparison. So this constant denunciation of Putin has to me, a very ominous purpose. And now they never say Russia; they say Putin's Russia.
Right.
I don't know if you've noticed that. It's like, so first you demonize Putin, and then you connect the country with him. There's no identity, no history, no people with rights who need to be respected. It's Putin's Russia.
Right.
And that makes it easier to do God knows what also.
And also when the Panama Papers were released, initially it was, Putin's implicated. And it turned out he was implicated because he may have known people,
Right. Well, there were Russians involved, as opposed to the Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, whose family was very directly involved. His father hid assets offshore to protect his inheritance from being taxed.
Yeah.
But Putin's name didn't appear, but every story had Putin's photo, even though he was not involved. And there's constant stories about how wealthy he is, and people just make up numbers. He's worth $40 billion. He's worth $400 billion. They're just making stuff up. But it's all for a purpose, and it's not for a good purpose.
Yeah. Now, before we get into the propaganda, I want to talk a little bit about Syria, because this is the other area. Now, of course, Assad is also the devil, apparently. We have many devils now. Assad must go. We're told Assad must go. Hillary Clinton has told us Assad must go. So, first of all, I mean, that this is accepted that an American statesperson can be walking around saying foreign leaders must go. Gaddafi must go. Saddam Hussein must go. Assad must go. It's just bizarre that this has become normal rhetoric.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's very, very dangerous. First of all, this notion that the United States has the right to decide who runs another country. And it's always coincides with charges of human rights violations. So Saddam Hussein, the operative, what was the words for Bush? It was they had a rape room and people were being tortured and there was a rape room. And I'm not making light of sexual assault, but I had this image of a door that said rape room on it. That was their canned charge against Saddam Hussein. Gaddafi had given his troops, it was all a lie, given his troops Viagra, and women were being raped. It was just the opposite. The people the U.S. was backing were using sexual assault as a weapon of war. So as soon as it's someone is killing their own people, decide it's barrel bombs. I'm not sure what makes a barrel bomb different from any other kind of bomb, but there's a war in Syria because of the United States. The United States, NATO, Israel, the Gulf monarchies have all worked together for the past 5 years to get rid of Assad, to destroy any strong secular government in that part of the world. And of course, where is ISIS strongest? In all these countries where America has intervened, in Iraq, in Libya, now in Syria. But it's just imperialism. The United States wants to control as much of the world as possible and uses its allies to help doing that.
Now, also, Syria being an ally with Russia, there's an interplay there because, obviously they're a natural ally because of their geographical proximity and as far as Russia having access to a port. And this all seems to be kind of linked up in just everybody's strategic national interests. But, we don't kind of get into that. We don't seem to cede that to anybody. Nobody else has any interest when sort of in the way of American imperialism.
Yeah, well, but the Syrians want the Russians to be there. Who's invited any other forces to be in their country? It's Syria, the sovereign government of that nation. So it's Russia that's following international law, not the United States. The United States is violating international law. You would never know it. These desperate people have become refugees. 9 million people internally and externally displaced in Syria, and it is all because of the United States and NATO and their allies. And yet you get story after story after story about the refugees, but no one ever pins the blame where it should be placed, and that's right in Washington.
Right. Now, we can get to the reason that happens and, talk about the news media and, just sort of how they just sort of accept carte blanche what comes to them from the White House. And this was all kind of laid out, I guess, in the New York Times in this profile about Ben Rhodes, who's the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications. And this thing apparently blew up into some tremendous brouhaha, to which he said, all these newspapers used to have foreign bureaus. Now they don't. They call us to explain to them what's happening in Moscow and Cairo. Most of the outlets are reporting on world events from Washington. The average reporter we talk to is 27 years old, and their only reporting experience consists of being around political campaigns. That's a sea change. They literally know nothing. This was literally the White House point person for strategic communications and national security, talking about how they just feed this information to the news media, who's just, wanting access, I guess, and, we can kind of tie this in here to the White House Correspondents' dinner, which kind of the annual sort of circus that happened about a week or two ago.
Yes.
And, what we get out of that is Obama's a funny man. He's funny, and look at him. Look how funny. And I get this from friends of mine, isn't it great? Isn't he funny? He's so funny, that Obama. He's in a way I'm thinking, we know what the next career can be. It could be, stand-up comic. I mean, he's a natural, apparently.
Well, we have a reality TV star who might be the president, so I guess that's the result of this.
There you go.
But yeah, this Correspondents' dinner is to me, it is a travesty. I mean, it just shows in high relief how the extent to which people in the media want access more than they really want to report. And then, you quoting this White House person, the other problem is what's happened to the media. Even large, wealthy, quote unquote, organizations like the New York Times keep laying people off, and they don't have bureaus all over the world and seasoned reporters. So there was a hope, there was a chance of getting some real reporting. And that doesn't exist anymore. But now they just want access. And when Bush wanted to invade Iraq, the New York Times helped him to invade Iraq. When Obama wanted to overthrow Gaddafi and try to overthrow Assad, the New York Times said it was a good thing. They just are scribes who repeat whatever they are told. And they, to me, are culpable of the crimes that successive U.S. presidents commit.
But it extends to the editorial boards as well. These aren't just reporters.
Oh, absolutely. They all move in the same. It's the ruling class, for lack of a better word. They all work together. They work hand in glove. After the overthrow of the elected president in Ukraine, we constantly hear about corruption and oligarchs in Russia. Well, the president of Ukraine, finally, the New York Times has revealed that the president of Ukraine was mentioned in the Panama Papers as hiding money. He is a billionaire. And this is provable. He was a candy manufacturer and chocolate king of Ukraine. He's a very wealthy man. He is an oligarch. You have never heard him referred to as an oligarch. And the New York Times editorial board, I guess we should thank God for small favors, finally paid attention to that. But they go right along as well and make the case and the other thing that's very frightening to me is that even Americans who want to be well informed, who read the paper, who watch the news, still don't know what's going on in the world because of these lies.
Right. So, I mean, you wonder, what is a curious, even intelligent citizen to do? I mean, they're so outgunned and outnumbered.
Yeah.
My solution is that, the first problem, if you've got a television in your home, that's probably the first problem right there. Because, whatever's coming out of that is not going to be helping you along. That, of course, is the ultimate propaganda tool. And it just seems to persist. I mean, people just can't seem to disconnect from that television addiction.
Yeah, it's the real news is on the internet, and there's a great site called The Real News, by the way, so which I recommend in addition to Black Agenda Report and others. I told a friend of mine told me she was frustrated because she said, "Well, what do I believe?" And I said, "Well, just assume whatever the White House says is a lie, especially when it comes to foreign policy."
Yeah.
I would stay away from the corporate media. That is my advice. And the media they tell you not to pay attention to, you should pay attention to. So RT used to be called Russia Today, and it's Putin's network, and they tell lies. And well, yeah, they're Russian, but they also give you news that the United States, none of these outlets, the cable news shows, the major newspapers, the network broadcasts do not give you at all. So anybody they tell you they make fun of or sneer at, I would take a look at. I mean, you have to be skeptical about everything and try to educate yourself, but I would stay away from the corporate media and go online.
Now, lastly, if we could just get to where we're out in the campaign. I mean, this incredible circus that we call a presidential campaign. I mean, every corner is more absurd. I mean, the Trump one, it needs no explanation. The fact that he provides Hillary Clinton this tremendous cover is shocking. And that's, to me, really the incredible story. The sort of entertainment part of this is what's happening, the Bernie or bust thing, which is all of a sudden become rather entertaining to me, because you have variant now Bernie or bust movements who seem to be in conflict with one another. I can't figure out who's running which Bernie or bust movement at the moment. But I mean, now you got variant movements who are trying to be the ones who are controlling and be the voice, and what are we doing, and will we write them in, and should we support you, and whatever it is. But it's at this point, I think it's all part of a musical that we can call Bernie Sanders Superstar. And that combined with Trump and Clinton, I don't know, where are we at?
Well, we took a lot of heat at Black Agenda Report for calling Bernie Sanders a sheepdog. The role that's been played in the past by Jesse Jackson or Dennis Kucinich or others, who galvanized progressives, the most left wing of the Democratic Party, and corral them, sheepdog them in line to support the eventual nominee, who was always someone who was conservative, because they're the ones who get the big money. They get the buy-in from the ruling class, and that person, could be Bill Clinton or Obama or Hillary Clinton, ends up getting the nomination. And so we said all along this was going to be the fate of Bernie Sanders. And I think we're proven right. It's not over yet. I know there's still some major primaries to go, but Democrats have, I'm not a Sanders supporter, but I'm grateful because he has exposed, just by running and becoming so popular, the corruption of the Democratic Party. These super delegates, elected officials, who are delegates no matter what, and who can outdo the will of the voters. The Democratic Party does not want the masses of the people choosing a nominee. They want to make sure it's somebody they want, somebody more conservative. So combined with the super delegates, they front-loaded the primaries in southern states. Now in the South Democrat means black. There aren't any white Democrats in the South anymore. When they did this, there were, and the idea was to get a more conservative candidate in the days when people like Al Gore and Bill Clinton held elective office in the South. And black voters, unfortunately, out of fear of the Republicans, always support the person they believe, they're told, is most likely to win. Even if it's somebody like Hillary Clinton, who most of them did not like when she was running against Obama, whose husband did so many things that were harmful, that were very damaging to the black community, because she is declared the front runner and the one most likely to win and the one most likely to be the Republican. Black people voted for her in the South, en masse. So the superdelegates, those early primaries being front-loaded in states where she was most likely to win, made it very difficult for Sanders to gain the traction that he needed. So now he said all along he would support the nominee. If he weren't the nominee, he would endorse the nominee, and he would not run as a third-party candidate. So his followers are trying to figure something out, which is a good thing. But I think ultimately, and I'm going to say that in my next Black Agenda Report column, Sanders supporters must pledge not to vote for Hillary Clinton. They can not vote. They can leave the presidential line blank. They can vote for Jill Stein. They can vote for another party. They can write somebody in, but they must not vote for Hillary Clinton. Trump is tearing the Republican Party apart. His rank and file supporters, the white nationalists I call them, have no interest in what the Republican elite have been selling them for years. And the Republicans are cracking because of it, and that's a good thing. The Democrats need to crack too. There's no reforming the Democratic Party. It needs to end, and the Sanders supporters can do much more than they probably imagined if they refuse to vote for Hillary Clinton.
What do you think the chances are we can end up with a four-way race and we include Gary Johnson as a Libertarian candidate?
I don't know how popular they are. You mean You mean if Bernie Sanders did decide to run?
No, I mean we have Jill Stein with the Green Party, and then Gary Johnson, and if we have enough fall away from Republicans not wanting to vote for Trump or Libertarians. I mean, Ron Paul came out and said this on CNN. The elder Paul said, "Don't waste your vote. If you're a conservative, vote Libertarian. If you're a progressive, vote Green."
Yeah,
and that's a very powerful statement for him to make.
Yeah, well, I think people are losing their fear of, the way our system is set up. If you don't vote for Democrats and Republicans, all you can do is be a spoiler. And the trauma of Bush defeating Gore and Nader being blamed for that in 2000 has kept people in line. But I'm finding that argument is carrying less and less weight, and that's a good thing. And it is my hope, and as we can already see, Hillary Clinton is ignoring the Sanders supporters. She's trying to get support from Republicans. She's getting high praise from one of the Koch brothers, who Democrats generally demagogue and use as a fundraising tool. He's saying he could live with her. So, and she is moving to the right. And if Sanders just delivers his supporters to her, she has no reason to try to appeal to them. But they must make it clear they're not going along, and they may end up having to very publicly reject Bernie Sanders if he does what he said and he endorses Hillary Clinton. It would be embarrassing for him, but they would be true to the beliefs that they say they hold and that made them such strong Sanders people, feeling the burn, as it were.
Yeah, or the political revolution. I mean,
yes.
What this is really an opportunity for it to emerge as something.
Yes, absolutely. Because the word revolution is marketing. He's not really a socialist. There's nothing revolutionary about voting for a Democratic presidential candidate. But it's interesting that people find those words appealing, and we will see if people really want to live up to that.
We'll see. Well, thanks so much. This has been great.
Thank you.
And we will talk again soon.
Yes, we will. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.